Good afternoon, algebra class. What we're going to do today is we're going to go over the algebra review for category 4. Again, all these questions are released EOC questions. So looking at question number 1, it says, what is the domain of f of x equals 9 minus x squared? Now remember, domain represents the x values. So if they're just graphing this, my domain will be all real numbers. Okay, no matter what, unless it's a situation, the domain will be all real numbers. Number 2. You want to figure out what is the range. Okay, now the range, the first thing to understand is we have a quadratic, so I would probably graph this in our calculator. When you graph it, you're going to see something that looks like this. Now the vertex is at 3, -8. Now you can also look at your table right here. This is your vertex, because if you look at the points next to it, it starts repeating. Once it starts repeating, like -7, -7, 1 and 1, that is where it starts curving, either up or down. In this case, it's curving up, so we have 3, -8, that's your vertex. So that means when I create my inequality for my range, that means it has to, that's their lowest point. So all numbers can equal -8 or also be greater than -8. Question number 3, they want the domain values. Again, domain is your x values. Then it's greater than or equal to -7. So that means its x is going to be greater than or equal to -7 and also less than 2. So just less than. So what that means, greater than or equal to, means it's going to be a closed circle. Just less, that means it's going to be an open circle. So our domain values, the farthest we can go to the left is -7, the farthest we go to the right is +2. So that's why our answer would be D. Number 4, a lot of you are struggling with this question. I know area is length times width, but when you look at this question, this is how we're going to find the area of the rectangle. Okay, so we take 36 times whatever W is going to be minus W squared. Now our x values represents our domain, which is these w's. So we got to figure out what are the possible answers or our domains we could plug in to get an area for that rectangle. Now, if you look at the answer, it is J, because it can't equal 0, but w can be greater than 0. Okay, but also has to be less than 36. Because if I plug in 36 into this, I get 0. So that means it can't be 36 or anything greater than 36. Because if I plug in 72 into this formula, I'm going to get a negative number. You can't have a negative area when you're finding the area of a rectangle. So the only thing that works is any number that comes between this. Technically, f and h do work, but that is not all the domain values. They want to figure out what are all the domain values of this. So f and h are part of it, but not all of them. J would be all the domain values. Number 5, it says what is the range, so the y values of this. So if you're drawing it, the quadratic would curve. This point right here would be y equals 1, okay, because of this, plus 1. So what that means is the y values can be equal to 1 or greater than 1. So again, if you can't see it, graph that on your calculator, and you're going to see it's going to look just like this. Number 8, you're trying to find which equation represents the axis of symmetry. Now remember, the axis of symmetry is cutting that parabola right in half. Okay, so you take your vertex, your highest point, and cut it right in half. So the left side should look like the right side. So the axis of symmetry would be x equals 2. Number 7, it says what is the maximum value of g? So maximum value is the highest point. So our highest point is y equals 9, so our answer is 9. That is our highest point for this parabola. Number 8, they're talking about what are the zeros. Now remember, zeros are x-intercepts. So you can look right here, the x-intercepts comes between 0 and 1 and 1 and 2. So if you figure out what numbers come between 0 and 1 and 1 and 2, you get 1/3 and 3/2. So again, zeros are your x-intercepts, where that parabola crosses the x-axis. This one says, what is a solution to r of x equals 0? So that means just saying when y equals 0, what is the solution? In this case is our x values, our x-intercepts. So our x-intercepts are right here as our solutions, because when y equals 0, so it can be -6 or +14. The only one that represents that is +14. So again, what is the solution to r of x equals 0? So that's just saying y equals 0. So when y equals 0, we have -6, +14. Number 10, so based on this, what is the width in feet of a porch with the greatest area? So our greatest area would be the highest point of our parabola. So that's our highest point, which is 350, but they want to know what is the width. It would be 25. So that would be our answer. So the highest point is our parabola, and our parabola is the width is 25. Question number 11. So it says, based on the graph, between which two values of x is 0 of g located? 0 again means the x-intercept. So it comes between 4 and 5, and -1 and -2. The only answer is between 4 and 5. Again, this can also be an answer, but they don't have it. So these are the two values the 0 is located, also known as your x-intercept. Number 12, they want to know if 1 is a solution to g of x equals 0. So they're just saying that, okay, if we get 1 when y is 0, so that means the coordinates would be 1, 0. What is another solution? Again, saying that what is the x-intercept? So we know 1, 0. Another one would be, okay, so if y is 0 again, what is x? In this case, it's 3. So number 13, what it's asking you is we have these three quadratics. So what I would do first is I would graph them. So I'm showing you what here I would do first is I would graph all three of these. When I graph all three of these, you can see all the lines, or the quadratics. Then what you need to do is figure out, okay, which one of these is false. So you would look at this and try to answer the questions. The only one that would be false would be A. The graph of these two, or at least two of these functions, have a minimum point. They don't have a minimum point. Only one of them has a minimum point. Two actually have a maximum point. The other ones would be true. The graph of all these functions have the same axis symmetry. They do. The axis symmetry is right here, x equals 0. So that's true. The graphs of two of these functions do not cross the x-axis. Yes, this one doesn't cross the x, and this one doesn't cross the x. So that's a true statement. And then last one, the graph of all these functions have different y-intercepts. They all have different y-intercepts. It would be -6, or should be -5, +6, +1. So the one that would be false would be A. Again, the easiest thing to do is please graph that. Again, that's how you get B, or excuse me, answer A for number 13. Number 14, they give us a vertex right here of 4.6, 12.2. That's that point right there. So when I use the axis of symmetry, I cut it in half. It's like a mirror image. So if I'm finding the other x-intercept, this is the first x-intercept. The other x-intercept would be over here because I'm using this to help me. The axis of symmetry cuts it right in half, so it's at 4.6. So to go to the left 4.6, the same thing as going to the right 4.6. So I get about 9.2. Okay, so the axis of symmetry tells us it cuts that parabola in half. Whatever one side looks like, the other side would look like. And that's again how you get B. Moving on, number 15, what I would do is I would literally graph this in my calculator. When you graph, it's going to look something like this. You want to know the vertex is either the lowest or highest point. In this case, we have our lowest point would be at -3, 1, which is answer H. Again, plug that right into your calculator, graph it, and you're going to see that it's going to be your lowest point, also known as your vertex. Number 16, it says what is the equation for the axis of symmetry? So here's the two dots. I cut it right in half. So going from one dot to the other dot, it's 6 points. So that means 3 dots, or 3 in or 3 this way would give us the middle. So when I cut it in half, it's 3 this way or 3 this way, which means x is -3. So my axis of symmetry is x is -3. Again, axis of symmetry is just cutting it in half, making basically two equal parts in a way. The left side should look just like the right side. Number 17, you have to find the x-intercepts of this quadratic. So what I would do is I graph it right in my calculator. When you graph it, you're going to see it's going through 2 points. So the x-intercepts would go through -1, and then it kind of goes through 0 and 1, which is very close to 1/5. Okay, so graph that. Once you graph it, you should see, you might have to zoom in on your calculator. You should see it goes through -1 and then 1/5. Alright, so number 18. We have to understand is we're going from here to here. So if it's inside the parentheses, that means we have a horizontal shift. So if it's x minus a number, that means we shift to the right. If it's x plus a number, that means we shift to the left. The reason it's going to be x plus a number, because the equation is always x minus a number. But if we go to the left, that means it would be x minus a negative. Minus a negative means a positive. So if we look at here, since it's x minus 7.5, we're shifting to the right. If we were shifted to the left, it would be x plus 7.5. That's why our answer would be F. Number 19, again, if we're going translating from x squared to 2x squared, that means our line is getting, or our quadratic is getting narrower. Okay, the larger this value is, the more narrower it's going to get. So that's why it would match answer J. Again, if you're confused, just graph these two, and you see right on your graph the two quadratics, it should be getting narrow. It's going to be inside the other one. Okay, if it's less than 1, it's going to get wider. Number 21, so if we want to see the values of A and C are both less than 0. So if A is less than 0, that means it's going to curve down. Okay, it's going to be negative. If C is less than 0, that means it's going to go below. It's going to be a negative value also. So the only one that would match that would be H. So the parabola is flipped, and then it's below 0. Okay. Number 21. So again, you have your 1x squared, and you're going to 7x squared. So I'm going from 1 to 7. So it's getting larger. That means the graph is going to get narrower. So if I graph this, it's going to be inside of the 1x squared. So again, the larger the value before x squared is, the narrower it gets. The smaller it is, the wider it gets. Number 22, key thing is it's 18 units below the vertex of graph W. So it's 18 units below, we're shifting it down. So if we're shifting it down, it's just simple as x squared and then x squared minus 18. Okay, so if it's a vertical shift, it's either going to be plus or minus. Since it's shifting down, we're subtracting. This would be a vertical shift up. Since we're adding, this is a vertical shift down. Number 23, first thing we have is our quadratic, 2x squared minus 6x. Now this tells us about the number of seats. We know we have 416, so what I do is I plug that in, and what I do is I put it in standard form. In order to put it in standard form, to move the 416 to the other side, so I have 2x squared minus 6x minus 416. And then what I do is you can either use the formula or the x method. The x method is a times c, which is negative 832. My b value, and I figure out what times what gives us this, and adds together gives us this, which is 26 and negative 32. Then it goes over my a value, which is 2. So 2x, I can simplify this by 2, so it's 13 and 1x. Simplify this by 2, it's negative 16 and 1x. So I have x plus 13 from here, and then x minus 16 from here equals 0. Set them both equal to 0. I get negative 13, positive 16, which means my answer is going to be 16. Number 24, we have the equation 0 equals 1/3 x squared minus 3. You're going to solve this just like a normal equation. You're going to get x squared by itself. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. To get rid of the fraction, you multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So 3 over 1 are just 3. So we get 9 equals x squared. Now to get x squared by itself, you do the opposite of squaring a number, which is taking the square root. So we should get, remember, x equals the positive or negative version of that, which is 3. So it's x equals plus 3 or x equals negative 3. Now we want the positive solution, so our answer would just be x equals 3. Number 25 is the same thing. We have the equation s equals n squared plus n. S represents the sum, so it's 156. So I plug it in. 156 equals n squared plus n. I subtract it on both sides. To get 0 equals n squared plus n minus 156. I use the x method again. A times c, my b value. I figure out what times what gives us negative 156 added together to give us 1. It's 13 and negative 12. So I set them as binomials. X plus 13, x minus 12 equals 0. Set them both equal to 0. Then after that I solve them. I get x is negative 13, x is 12. We need the positive version. Obviously x would be 12. Number 26 is the same way. We have to solve this though. So I can't subtract this, so I have to square it. So I square it and get x squared minus 7x plus 49. I combine terms. Then I multiply by this 2 on the outside to get 2x squared minus 28x plus 98 equals 32. Subtract 32 to get into standard form. Once I have my a, b, and c, I couldn't see the factor using the factoring method, so what I did is I used the formula. I plugged in the formula, and then I got x equals 11 and x equals 3. Now remember, this is something you don't have to memorize. It's going to be right on your formula chart. You just have to understand how to take these numbers for a, b, and c and plug them in here. Number 27, you just had to solve. So you plugged in, we knew the length was 30 feet, so we plugged in 30 and just solve. First thing to get t squared by itself, you got to get rid of the 0.8, so the opposite would be dividing. We get 37.5 equals t squared. Now to get t by itself, the opposite of squaring is taking the square root, so we get t to be about 6.1. So just solving a normal equation, just remember to get rid of anything that's squared, you take the square root, the opposite, the inverse. Number 28, same thing, we're solving this. So the first thing I did is I got in standard form, so I moved the 18 to the left side. Now I have my a, b, and c. I used the factoring method, so a times c is negative 54. My b value is positive 15. Now 18 times negative 3 is negative 54, and then 18 plus negative 3 is 15. So it's over 3x because that's my a. So I simplify that to basically 6 and 1x. Simplify this to negative 1 over x. I create my binomials. So I have x plus 6 and then x minus 1 equal to 0. Set them both equal to 0 to get negative 6 and positive 1. Number 29, you have to find the perimeter. So the first thing to do is find what the x would be. We know the total would be 78. So what I do is I add all the sides, which I did here. I combine like terms. There's no other x squared, so it's x squared. I have 6x once I combine all my x's together, and I have positive 6 when I combine all my constants. Then what I do is I turn it into standard form. So I move the 78 to the other side, so I get x squared plus 6x, minus 72 equals 0. I use the x method. A times c is negative 72. My b value is 6. From here, 12 times negative 6 is negative 72, and 12 plus negative 6 is 6. And then I create my binomials, x plus 12, x minus 6 equals 0. Set them both equal to 0. I got negative 12, positive 6. You know it can't be a negative, it has to be a positive x value when you're finding perimeters, so we plug that in. So h equals 6. Last one, number 30. Same thing, you're solving an equation, so I gotta get x squared by itself, so I add 16 to both sides. Once added to both sides, I get x squared equals 16. To get x by itself, the opposite of squaring x is taking the square root, so I square root of both sides, so x equals plus or minus 4.